cleaned up. Already tried putting it in. I'm expecting to have to do some clearancing on the subframe here for the diff area, and maybe over here for the header. Alright, this is going to be the first cut. It should get me most of the way there, if not all the way. I may need to cut a little bit more later, but basically I want all the room up to the rack so I can move the whole engine and transmission backwards. This is what I saw during the first test fit. I wound up having to cut away a little bit more than I had originally marked. One thing that makes a swap really viable is all the room under the hood. Alright, that's after the first cut. We'll see if it's enough. If it is enough, eventually I'll box this in, box all this in of course, and I'll probably add some threads here and here and have like a whole extra brace. Alright, here's pretty much how it's going to sit. Just got it mounted with some temporary mounts right now, but got good clearance on each side. I tested taking off this cover, and there's room to take it off, so I should be able to service anything on the side I need to. Transmission on this room over here. They cut out for the original transmission. Lines up with the crank pulley, so there's plenty of room to pull it off as well. So, oil filter clearance. The main reason I went with this particular adapter plate is because it leans the motor to the rear, which gives me more room in the front. With a little bit of reworking, all the stock throttle cable is going to work. I just need to lengthen this bit. Booster hose, I was able to get cruise control. The CRV fuel hose did make it, but it's getting fairly tight. And this is from a 3rd gen Prelude. Already started on the traction bar / front mount point. Yeah, it's just going to attach this hammer right on here on the arm. I even made it so I can still fit the beauty bar, and the plastic cover will still fit with some trimming. Radiator clearance obviously is, because this is where the stock one mounts. It would fit, but it'd be pretty much right up on the alternator. No room for a fan. So I'm gonna do a tucked radiator. It'll sit further in here. Should give me enough room, and the condenser will go on front. For the mounts, I want to keep the OE levels of vibration, so I'm not going poly. I'm reusing stock mounts. This is actually a 3rd gen Prelude front mount. Basically, I'm just going to have bracket come off the block, match up to this, and I'm going to do the same thing for all the other mounts. One other thing I'm doing, in addition to the mounts, I've got this little damper off like I think it's 08 Acura TL. So I'm going to make a mount for that. I'll give it some more control. For the axles, all I'm doing is taking the right side axle, putting it on the left side. Length is maybe slightly short, but I think it'll work. And for the other axle, the stock one is just way too short. So I've got an element, front right element axle that looks like it's going to work fine. Here's some pictures from the rebuilt and painted subframe. Stock, the heater valve kind of angles towards the right side of the car, and you're limited in how much you can move it and still have that controlled cable work. So I made a new bracket, and it's kind of going straight out of the firewall. But after doing all this, I think the better idea would have been to just put like a 180-degree bend coming right off it to loop it back towards the left side of the car. For the power steering line, I spliced a 99TL and a CRV line together. These are the first 3 mounts I made. I made the right side one a little bit later on. I'm not going to be running EGR, so I cut off this housing and welded it up. For the right side mount, I just took a left side rubber mount and mounted it over here. Then I made a bracket from the engine to that. This also shows where I mounted the power steering reservoir. This is the engine damper mounted. When making the headers, I basically just copy the P2R big tube header sizes. They merge into a 3-inch collector, and the rest of the exhaust is 3-inch. This is the completed traction bar, which really morphed into a whole subframe, because once I decided to make the brace between the lower arms, I decided just to add those portions running up to the traction bar itself to make the whole thing one complete piece. The intake is 3.5 inches. I actually already had that pipe cut section from a previous project, so I didn't have to do much work to make the intake. Alright, so I'm on kind of a time crunch. I'm pretty far behind schedule right now, so I haven't actually been filming most of the work, just taking pictures. As you can see, I'm pretty far along at this point. I just finished up the AC system and the radiator. These are where the charge ports are now. Because of header clearance, I had to put this fan is a pusher, and I got one over here as a puller. Alright, to mount it, basically what I did is I already knew I was going to have to cut the subframe for clearance in the dip housing area. So I just raised the engine up from below, marked out on subframe where I thought I needed to cut, dropped it, cut, up, marked any more, dropped it again, cut. Did that 2 or 3 times, I think. And then once I was happy with that, basically right now it's as far up and as far back as possible without touching the steering rack. And I didn't want to move the steering rack. After that, I kind of boxed in where I cut on the subframe. I'll probably roll in some pictures for that. And then that was it for the subframe pretty much. And then I made sure that I had like good axle clearance. And at that point I made some crude mounts that are just solid. I made 4 of those and a traction bar. So the whole motor is solidly mounted. Then I removed one mount at a time and built the final mount for each mount, basically. What I'm doing is I'm reusing the stock rubber mounts, and well, for this side, stock mount. Then I bought another stock mount for this side that I've mounted on this side. The rear mount's just a stock CRV1. And the front mount, which I don't have right now, is it's from a Prelude, their Gent Prelude. It just mounts on the traction bar. And in fact, these are all the parts I just got back from powder coat, all the mounts and brackets and stuff I made. As you can see, I got a little carried away with the traction bar. It's traction bar and subframe, and I've also added holes on the bottom. Probably gonna do some kind of panel on here. As for maintenance with how it's mounted, I've tested a few things. I can get all the covers off here, and I should be able to do a time belt in the car. Rear header can be removed and installed without having to remove the engine, although it is pretty tight. Trans, if I ever need to remove the trans, I will have to drop the engine down a few inches because there's just not enough room right there to move it that way. The only annoying thing is alternator. It won't come out through here, but it will come out through here. So if I ever need to change it, I just need to pull the headlight, and it comes out through this hole. Here's what it's looking like from below. As you can see, I'm concerned about, so I'm doing the exhaust like this because it gives me more ground clearance, because obviously the starter's in the way. I lose like 2 inches of ground clearance trying to route it under the starter. So I've been doing a lot of, I wrapped it, also added this stuff, try to keep the heat from heat soaking the transmission too much. I think it'll be pretty good the way it is. So I tapped these holes here. I still need to make, the final thing I'm going to make for this is a heat shield and a splash shield that goes like this, that protects the starter, because this isn't a good spot for the starter really, because it's going to get soaked, and the drain had like a drain on the back side, and now it's hot. It's in the wrong spot basically, so I don't want this to go wet. Over here there's a small gap, so let's just put some silicone just to try to keep splash from get up in the housing. This gap doesn't actually lead up in there. As for the fill bolt, it is tight, but it does come out, so that's good. You can see, get some light. Yeah, so that's back there. That's the steering rack, and it's pretty much as far back as it can go. And I am using rubber mounts, so I have to have a certain amount of room for play as the motor moves. But it's about, can't really get any further back really. But yeah, see. And this reinforcement plate also had to trim a little bit. Still working on the exhaust. It's mostly done. Just need to do the hangers. It's only got one hanger right now. Had a bad angle, but I've trimmed a lip on the subframe to clear the header. That's where it's really tight. It's also really tight against the rear mount. That plug was pretty tight, so I ground a little bit off the lip there. Now I can come in, I can plug it in and out pretty easily. These are the stock cables. They do fit right for the K-series transmission, at least on this end. And, well, I installed these hybrid racing bushings, but so the shift cable, the length is pretty good. The select cable was too long, so I had to, like, instead of going over here, I had to take a longer route. So this end of the shifter cables was too long on both of them. So what I did is I just cut them off, threaded them, added a little adapter here, and I have rod ends, which combined with the hybrid racing on the transmission end, it makes everything nice and tight, and also gives me, I do have some length adjustment here in case I need to change the position of the shifter. So the factory CRV shifter, the pivot point is like right around here, and the shift cable attaches below. And to get this, to make this so this isn't sticking up really high, I basically cut a hole in the floor, and luckily there's this big gap, this is a big empty area in here. So this hole doesn't actually lead outside, it just leads into another little cavity in here. So I don't have to seal anything. But I just cut a hole so I can drop the shifter as far down as possible. So I can get this pivot point basically as far down as possible. And that gives me pretty good, this all fits now, just like stock. And once it's on, you can't even tell it's modified just by looking at it. So that's exactly what I wanted. Still working on the ECU, as you can see. Well, worked out good because the factory J series circuit board fit right into the CRV case, except for it has an extra connector on the backside. I just had to do a cutout for that connector, otherwise it screws right in, just like stock. So the ECU and everything fits just like the stock one does. And what I'm going to do, so here's a harness, or this end of the harness. These plug into the ECU, and then back here, you got the OBD connector, and these wires need to be tapped into basically the stock harness for like power and some sensors and stuff. What am I going to do? So I saw the factory ECU connectors up in here, or at least one of them. I got this old jumper harness, which I can basically, I'll just plug that into one of these, and I can just basically cut these and splice into these. So I don't want to splice into the factory harness if I can avoid it. This is the finished exhaust. It has some extra stuff laying around the shop, so it has 2 resonators, 2 mufflers, and a 3-inch high flow cat. This is how I hooked up the radiator. I used some preformed silicone sections with hose joiners between them. Alright, mostly done at this point. Still, next thing I'm installing is a Walbro 255 low pressure gauge, and my used power steering pump is kind of seeping, so I'm just gonna throw a kit at it now before it makes a huge mess. And also the next big thing is a 2011 Element rear diff. Alright, put a few dozen miles on it, just driving around this area, just testing it. Seems to be okay, at least as far as mechanically speaking. VTEC isn't engaging, or at least I think it isn't, because the power drops off pretty, or flatlines right around 4,750 to 5,000. So That's not a big of a deal right now because I'm still breaking in the clutch, so I don't want to drive it that hard anyways. But I'm just gonna take it and try to use it for work for a week, maybe two. See how it works out. Still in two-wheel drive mode right now because I'm about to take the drive shaft out of a shop and have it shortened. Maybe upgrade the U-joints. That's an option. I didn't get any of it on film, but I polished it up a little bit because it's pretty rough. Obviously, it's got new wheels. Did a front lip, just a Jeep lip, and I tinted these things front and rear. They don't stand out so bad, and also some tinted taillights with the clear tinted lens.